So welcome, Kai. Really good to see you. So let's start with your choice of poems. Say something about your choice.
Something, they're brilliant. Yeah, what about them? Why did I choose them? W.S. Merwin is, when I started writing poetry, I realize I'm old now, right? So no, seriously, when you teach students and there are things that you remember, which they have no memory of, and it's that they have no memory of it, like no memory of a dial-up modem. My God, where? And so I started writing poetry when I went to university in Jamaica, and the internet was just starting, right? And so you could search for things. Probably was Alta Vista. It wasn't Google at the time. Does anyone remember Alta Vista? Yeah. So you're my age, people. Yeah. And W.S. Merwin was the first poet that I discovered on my own, and there's something just special about that. To just in a random way discover someone who blows your mind. And that poem, My Friends, and there's a beautiful reading, and you read it so beautifully, almost exactly as he does. I mean, you paused in exactly the same places, and it's hard because there's no punctuation in the poem. But I knew when I discovered that poem that I'd keep on coming back to it, and I didn't get everything, and it was enough. That how could an image be so stark and so precise and have so much resonance, that there's so much happening inside the image, and you can see it perfectly, but it's so resonant that you cannot possibly unpack all the meanings at once. So my friends without fathers or houses hear doors opening in the darkness, whose halls announce, behold, the smoke has come home. Like, what do you do with that? So just for years you keep on coming back to that and going, how can I create an image like that? How can I create an image that is pulsing so much, and that is so precise in the reader's imagination, but the image doesn't quite make sense, even though it makes perfect sense. I think immediately I knew that was great writing, and that was the kind of writing I wanted to do. And Lorna Goodison, I mean, I was telling you earlier, I could have chosen a million poems from Lorna Goodison. I think she's just the first poet whose entire catalogue I think I know. I think if you know any Lorna Goodison poem and you shout out the first line, I can probably tell you the whole poem, which is really nerdy and stupid. But there was, I guess particularly when I came here, I knew there was a trick that I call it a trick that cheapens it. There's a posture that she has in her poems that doesn't make sense here. And so therefore when I moved to England, it became very important for me to hold on to that. And that she was unapologetically spiritual. And it wasn't religion that she was preaching, but she would say lines like, it is, each of us must in this time bring our portion of light. And I don't know any British poet who would say something like that. Not without undercutting it with irony, or, and she never apologized for it. She's just like, I am going to tell you what is most important on my heart. And I'm not going to be coy, I'm not going to be clever. I genuinely believe this, and I'm going to tell you it. And that feels to me a slightly different posture than I find here. I mean, I know there are all kinds of things I believe, and if, especially when you're an academic as well, you always feel the need to undercut it and go, look, I can be ironic, I know that sounds precious or earnest, and she never ever did that. And I think that became important for me in my writing, that if there was something really important that I believed, then the skill of the writing had to tell you that, and I should never undercut it. I should never disown it. I should just tell you, this is important. This is what's on my heart, and craft has to sell it, not being coy. Yeah.
I mean, going on from that, it's one of the things that strikes me reading your collections is the biblical refrain that goes through pretty much all of your writing, the cadences and rhythms of the Bible. I wonder whether you say something about that in your own life, the impact of the Bible and the.
Oh, I mean, the simple answer is I grew up in Jamaica. I mean, that honestly is sufficient an answer. But yeah, it is. It's what you come across everywhere. You know, there isn't even such a thing as like all religion in Jamaica is fundamental, are fundamentalist, which is a problem, right? No, it is. You know, so even Rastafari, like Rastafari that we celebrate, and that I celebrate as just kind of bucking against the system and offering something different, even that is a fundamentalist religion. There is something very strict, and even though you learn to, well, I've learned to resist that, and that there is a danger in that, and there's a way that can hurt people. But at its best, when someone believes that strongly, and with that kind of belief, when they know how to put that to music or to poetry, it is excessively powerful. And that's what Jamaica always was for me. It was a place where, you know, if an old woman sees you on the street, she doesn't say, "How are you doing?" She says, how are you and the Lord?" And you think, well, I know how I am. I'm not sure about God. You know, so it's just the environment that you live in, and sometimes that can get very, I don't know, apocalyptic. I remember there was one woman from my church growing up. She could see you on a Sunday morning, and she'd honestly tell you something like, she'd just come up to you out of nowhere, like, and she'd say, "Oh, me and the devil was fighting for your soul last night." And you think, who won? You know, so, but no, so it just kind of it seeps in. I think it just became, and then I got, you know, as you know, and there were such great verses in the Bible, like especially in kind of Jeremiah and those kind of old prophets, which is often about God's destruction, but still just the imagery. You know, when God is about to destroy a place, he doesn't just say, "I'll smite you. I will sweep you with the broom of destruction, and I will turn this into a land of owls." Whoa! Like, that is good. I mean, that's good.
That is good.
So yeah, it's turned out.
So, talking more about your childhood, I thought I'd start actually with your grandfather, Percy Miller. There's this wonderful poem about him called First Book of Chronicles in your first collection.
Wow.
Yeah,
you
it's
researched.
a lovely poem about him. And this sense of you continuing his work. I mean, that's somehow the suggestion of the poem. It turns at the end with a suggestion, perhaps.
Yeah.
You might be continuing his work. He was a journalist for the Gleaner, I think.
He was.
Yeah. So introduce us to your grandfather.
He was a journalist. That's. But he came from that generation of Jamaican writers who, you know, there's no such thing as a kind of creative writing school or an MFA program. So that's one of the things happening, and it's before independence, and they're intellectuals, and the whole in a very real way, the job of building a nation was important to them, and there are things to do, like you have to design a flag, you have to come with a constitution. You have to think about what it means to be a country. That's what my grandfather comes out of. And the other thing is you have to write a literature. You have to write a literature for the nation. I can't imagine living in that time where those are like genuine concerns that you're thinking about. And he came out of that, and so all of his friends, and my grandfather never became a writer, but my father is from this family where, because my grandfather was a journalist, he did want to be a creative writer as well. All of his fellow journalists, when I teach Jamaican literature, I'm teaching all of my grandfather's friends. I'm teaching my father's godfather and all of them. They're just part of that ethos. So certainly in my own family, there's this sense of, oh, you're carrying on your grandfather's tradition. And I remember writing the Book of Chronicles, absolutely suggesting that. But the other thing I'd say is that you generally have to be careful of the origin stories of any writer, because writers lie. And it's not just that they lie, but they tell stories that are compelling, and because they're attracted to narrative, they're attracted to those things that make sense. So I think there's First Book of Chronicles and Second Book of Chronicles in that book. And I tell this story that one of my grandfathers, Percy, was a writer, and the other was a preacher, a Pentecostal preacher. And somehow I feel they meet inside me. I wasn't close to any of my grandfathers. But that's an easy way to say what kinds of things influence me, to link it to my grandfather. But I don't think, I think if I was being honest with him, and if I thought about it more carefully, those influences aren't coming to me via my grandfathers. But it's an easy metaphor to throw out. And so I throw it out, but I'm not sure I'm as convinced by it. But it is absolutely true. My grandfather was a writer. All of his friends were writers. They were that first generation of Caribbean literature, which includes V.S. Naipaul's father as well. So all of them, those early pre-independence journalists across the Caribbean, who in their spare time, they were also writing short stories and novels, and
And while we're on your grandparents, what about your grandmother? There's that lovely poem, Speaking in Tongues.
Still not true. I mean, still true, but not true.
So let's go on to your mother then. I'm just working my way through your family. I just thought, why not? There's that lovely sequence, Broken Too, in your first book that you write very beautifully about your mother.
Right, what did I say?
What did I say? I said it's a very beautiful sequence.
I can't remember it now.
So perhaps introduce us to your childhood in a way, what world you came from, your mother and so on.
You see, in a strange way, sometimes I'm embarrassed by my childhood in Jamaica, and I know why. Like I remember once having very, very early, probably before the first book came out, but it was obvious that I was putting together a book, and it was very sweet how there's some of that kind of, again, older generation of Jamaican writers and Caribbean writers who took me in very quickly and kind of mentored me, or just affirmed my place in this world. And one of the first writers who invited me to dinner was Olive Senior, who is this great Jamaican short story writer and poet and everything. She works across genres like me. And she asked me, I remember very clearly, she asked me, so tell me about your childhood. Where were you born? Where did you grow up in Jamaica? And I told her, well, my family lives in Hope Pastures. And she said, dear God, never tell anyone that. I said, why? She said, you're a Caribbean writer, you can't come from the middle class. You see, you have to come from either rural Jamaica or, like the slums, like the tough streets of Kingston. And I didn't. My childhood was so beige. and boring. I mean, I remember there's a huge incident in my neighborhood one year because some kids, and I don't even know who they were at the time, I mean to this day, but they were walking up the neighborhood and they threw an egg at Mrs. Hendricks' door. Oh!
That bad.
The scandal. The neighborhood is going to the dogs. Oh my God. You know, it like, you know, when people hear that you come from Jamaica, you know, there's so much color that they add to your world immediately. You know, even when I teach, you know, and sometimes you don't correct people, they say, oh, you know, you come from Jamaica, so you understand the struggle, and you go, yeah, sure. Yeah, yes. Real tough out there. And, you know, that's not exactly true, but it was... yeah, so sometimes I don't think of my life as being very spectacular, but of course it was. You know, I loved my childhood. Well, you know, most of it. I mean, you know, kids suck, right? I mean, everywhere, so. But especially now, I mean, I think as I grow older, I realize how different my childhood was from here, and probably how colorful it actually was, just how much language I got connected to, and like even now I think going back to Jamaica, and I think my parents made sure of this. So I should say my father is very kind of Kingston. He was born in Kingston in a very middle class household, you know, kind of almost mixed race, man. My mother is maroon African Jamaican from rural Jamaica, and they gave me access to both those worlds. And I think that's always been important to me, that I have. So there's a linguistic variation in my household as well. Like my father can't speak patois. You know, he can try. But my mom, she is the one who gave me access to that language. And so there's my childhood, but I think what I enjoy about any place, certainly Jamaica then and now, is its multiplicity, and the fact that I can enter different worlds at different times. Yeah,
So while we're on your childhood, again, well, two poems I wanted to draw out. One was a psalm for gay boys in nearby bushes, which I really, really liked. And again, your sequence broken in the first collection. You say, I would write about the love of men and the fear of stones, which in my country is the same thing. So I wanted to talk about growing up gay in Jamaica.
Yeah,
Is that too bold a question?
No, not at all. I mean, but what about it?
How was it? Because, you know, people have... Someone was telling me, it's very homophobic there.
It is very homophobic. That's a very difficult question, especially when asked here. And it took me a lot to uncover why that's difficult. So Jamaica is a very homophobic country. But I think what might surprise a lot of people, if you ask me the place where I am most comfortably gay, it's in Jamaica. Because I don't have to translate my queerness. I know the language, I know the moves, I know where to go, I know. When I first came to England to do a master's in Manchester, and it still happens to this day. I might go to a club and the man at the door might say, do you know what kind of club this is? Because I clearly don't read as gay enough in this country, which, and I think it's, to be fair, I think it's my blackness. My blackness doesn't read as gay. And I can never explain that anyway, that's just difficult. Or I remember another incident, and this is a weird incident, but I think it tells you my complicated feeling about queerness between the two countries. I remember that same time when I came to England, and again, this is years and years ago, this is probably 15 years ago. I was working in a student shop, just working behind the till. and one of the benefits that you had if you're working there was that there's a very careful roster, and we all got to play our music for 1 hour. And so you really look forward to getting your chance. And of course, because it's my first time away from home, when it's my turn, I am blasting every Jamaican song, right? And so one day I'm in the store and it's my turn on the roster. So I am blasting music. And I remember the song that I was playing. It was Iwayne's Lava Ground, which is, it's just a song about resistance. We stand up on the lava ground. Yeah. Anyways, I'm playing this song, and a woman comes in, and I didn't recognize at first that she was upset with me, but she was just so angry, but I couldn't have figured that it was directed towards me. Anyway, she's cashing, and I'm trying to be pleasant. Hi, do you want anything else? Blah, blah. And she just grabs her stuff, and then finally she can't hold it anymore. She said, "Could you please turn off that music? Do you know how homophobic it is?" And clearly she couldn't hear it. And there are a couple of things happening in her mind. It's at a time where that discourse about Jamaica being so homophobic has infiltrated her. She has made a decision that I'm in a store with a big black man who has dreadlocks at the time. He's clearly playing Jamaican music. If he comes from Jamaica, he can only either be a victim of homophobia or an agent of the homophobia. She decides I'm an agent of homophobia. And so in her very earnest attempt to advocate for the black queer body, she ends up silencing that body. And she cannot, and like, I know that she's trying to be helpful and she's trying to do something good, but oftentimes I find that difficult here, that whenever people ask me about how homophobic Jamaica is, it often becomes a chance for them to be superior in a strange way. For them to say, "Oh, you must be so glad you're here." And that's very difficult for me, because I don't think I don't think it's that easy. So that's why that question is hard. But yeah, it was very homophobic. But it was very freeing at the same time. And I think the two things are true at once, and it's very hard for me to dissect how those things are both true.
I mean, in a psalm for gay boys, there is this beautiful mixture of brutality in it, or fear, or the possibility of that, and tenderness, which comes out very strongly in that poem.
Right. Yeah, and I think I'm always trying to look at those two things. But queerness is hard to talk about. I think definitely in my growing up it was very difficult. I think now it's a lot less difficult, because that's just how countries are. They grow up, they move on. It's a dynamic situation. I know, even teaching a semester back at the university in Jamaica a couple of years ago, I could not recognize any of, again, the kids. Like they just treated queerness in a very different way than even in my days. It was, but which is why I wrote that poem, because, and probably I'll read it when it comes to the reading. But it had to do with a moment of violence, and that surprises me now, that it still happens in Jamaica. But it's gotten to the point where when it happens, it surprises me. And I think, oh my God, yeah, that, yeah.
I mean, talking about violence, violence has always been a theme in your work. It's not the only theme by any means. But in the new collection, in Nearby Bushes, it really comes to the fore. It even starts, doesn't it, with a list of murdered people. Yeah. And this refrain of "in nearby bushes," which becomes it's a fearful refrain, and then the title sequence, which is a wonderful, terrifying sequence, is largely a post-mortem poem about a woman raped and murdered. So, why so much violence in this new collection?
again, because I'm writing about Jamaica.
Hmm.
But that phrase, is there anyone from Jamaica here? Yeah? Or Jamaican roots?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, cool. If you go to Jamaica, that is the phrase in nearby bushes is a phrase that you will hear every single day. It will be on the news. It will be in the newspaper. It's a haunting phrase. But we even make jokes about it. Like I remember just the other day I saw on Facebook, one of those memes, posted in some Jamaican group that only Jamaicans know the answer to this question. Where did the gunman escape to? And everyone wrote, in nearby bushes. I mean, like 500, 1,000 people responded, duh, in nearby bushes. So that's a phrase that all Jamaicans know. And it's weird, right? Because it's not just that the thieves always escape to nearby bushes, and they do. But you just don't know how they make those escapes. Like, I mean, you'll hear that the thieves broke into, they robbed a bank on the 5th floor of a building in New Kingston, and they escaped to nearby bushes. Like, how the hell did they do that? And like, you think by now that it's some magical property that only thieves have access to. Like, I now think that if criminals in Jamaica come across a house plant, they can just say some magical words, and it opens up and it becomes the nearby bushes, and they can dive into it, and the police can't follow them. And so, I think in the imagination of Jamaicans, the nearby bushes is one, the most dangerous space there is, but also slightly magical, because it's everywhere and we don't know where it is, and only the criminals have access to it, and all the bodies are there, all the murders take place there, and it's near, and it might be that bush, and it might, but you don't know. But I guess I feel that that's what poetry does. Like, you take the things that exist there in a kind of folkloric space, and you throw language at it. Like, this thing that every Jamaican talks about, what happens if I throw language at it, and I think about it and I define it. And so it had to be a violent collection. It had to be a violent space, if that makes sense.
I mean, it is very, very haunted by violence. I mean, that title sequence, which I think is wonderful, actually, terrifying, but it's very uncomfortable to read, but beautiful, terrifying. It's also even at times slightly humorous. Like the lovely touches about your uncle, about. It's also the natural it's also a paean to the natural world and to nature itself, in a dark form, but a beautiful form.
Not nature poetry as you know it.
No, not nature poetry as you know it.
But nature poetry.
Nevertheless, yeah. I wondered because it follows the murder of a woman in Jamaica, particularly a post-mortem of that. How did you find the ethics of that? Because you didn't know her, I don't think,
right.
Or at least in the book you talk about that. I wondered how you felt about that, writing about a person who was murdered.
So difficult, and it's not just a question of ethics. It's about somebody who was murdered. How will her family feel about it? But the bigger question for me is, I'm writing about the female body. I'm writing about the female body that has been violated in a certain way, and I'm trying to imagine it. What right do I have to approach that body? What right do I have to approach that pain? and to make art out of it. How do you make art out of that? How do you think about it sensitively enough? I don't know, that haunted me again and again. I kept on stopping and saying, I have no right to this material. Or just wanting one of my female friends to just here, take it. But the only way I can say is that she haunted me. Like when I don't know why. I don't know why I read this one article about this one body, and there's so many bodies like that. Why it became so real to me, and why I woke up every night feeling haunted by her death. Why probably it was other things that are hard to talk about. My cousin who was raped. And that's hard. That's hard thinking about just how frequently that happens, that there's some bodies that are so vulnerable in Jamaica, and I don't think I always appreciated that. There's another essay that I was trying to write the other day, trying to finish another book of essays about what crimes, it's called the crimes that haunt our bodies. And different crimes haunt different bodies in different ways. As in part of writing that, I'm trying to think about my own body, and my own body as black and male, and what my body is vulnerable to, and what other people might not. There are certain fears that you walk with, and if you have a different kind of body, you just don't walk with that fear. The fears that we walk with are particular to the bodies that we walk in. But I remembered, for some stupid reason, when I was probably 19, and my sister said to me, if for some reason, my sister is like 4 years older than me, but for some weird, bizarre reason, I got my license first. And so I was the big brother. I had the car, or I had access to the car. And my sister asked me once if I could give her a ride to our friend's house. Our friend lived at most 7-minute walk away. I was like, you lazy wretch, just walk. You don't need me to give you a drive. And we had this stupid fight, which is weird because my sister and I are really close. And I remember being so angry when she finally said, you wouldn't understand, you're a man. And that was all, and I felt that was just lazy reasoning, blah, blah, blah. Why would you use my gender as a way that I couldn't understand the situation? And we didn't say anything more about it. And it probably was only writing this collection, I thought about that road, and there are at least 3 plots full of bushes. It's the nearby bushes, and it's there, and it was night, and she had to walk past it, and her body is vulnerable in a way that my body simply is not vulnerable, and she has to think about that. There's no other way around it. So how do I finally come to a point where I think about that hurt and that care that I've just never had to think about. I don't know if I've come up with the right answer, but it was, I grappled with it and I thought about it a lot. And I just wondered, how do I write this ethically and sensitively and morally? And it was hard.
Yeah, interesting.
I'm sorry, that's a long answer.
Reminded me slightly of, Frost. He said that some of his poems were too terrible to read in public. He wouldn't read them at readings, like out. He wouldn't read at readings, for instance.
Yeah, I wouldn't read that last section.
I remember when I saw you read just recently, you were saying you wouldn't read that. Going on to another poem here, where the wild deer run, which is a poem I really love from the new collection. One of the themes of it is about belonging and not belonging. It seems to me, and that again seems a theme throughout your work. In the poem Place Name, you say, we are an insufficiently imagined people from an insufficiently imagined place. And then at the end of what I remember is is the Circle of Thunder, which is a lovely poem. I really like that poem, where you say, though I never understood then what places meant, nor what it meant to be outside them. So there seemed to be this question of belonging or not belonging. I remember that all the way through the collections, and including the first collection.
Uh-huh.
Can you say something about belonging or not belonging?
Oh, nothing eloquent. But I guess I am always. I don't know if I can answer the question about belonging, but certainly, in increasing focus, I guess my preoccupation has always been place. And I guess when you think about place, you are thinking about the question of belonging. I remember reading. There's one theorist who said that when you build a house,
we have a ghost.
Whenever an architect builds a house, and you look at that newly constructed house, you think, a house always creates two spaces. Before there's just a landscape, you introduce a house onto the landscape, and you've created two spaces. But we mostly only ever consider one space. We consider the kitchen and the staircase and the rooms. But a house is as much the creation of an inside as an outside. That didn't exist before. And it is the same with everything. It is the same with nation. It is the same with community. Whenever you create that, you have created an outside. And I just think it behoves us to think about that. Who is on the outside? And so that's always been fascinating to me about places. Like when we construct places and when we think about what is our community, what is our home, someone has to exist on the outside of that. And for that I included gay people. That included certainly in the class that I grew up in. It included a contempt for people who lived in the ghetto, a contempt for their worldview. I just thought it was important to think about these other these people who don't belong or who we haven't allowed to belong. And there's a way to give voice to them that's not what I want to say. Because I don't believe in this idea that writers give voice to people who don't have voice. That's full of too much hubris. Because people are always speaking. It's not about voiceless, it's about being deaf. And so how do you hear what people have always been saying? And so I think that's why these questions of belonging and not belonging keep on coming up, because I'm always trying to think about the outside. Yeah.
We better start to come to a close. But I wanted to come back to a poem from the first collection, How We Became Pirates, which is actually the first poem of the first collection.
My God, you're reminding me of so many things.
And in that poem you talk about stealing poetry from the poets, so that English poetry is no longer from England.
Sorry. Yeah.
So can you say about stealing poetry from the poets, so English poetry is non... But so in a way that's for me a question about you and writing and why you've written poetry and stealing poems from the poet from the English.
Yeah. Again, there are all of these answers that you give, and there's some truth to all of them. But I think the truth is that it's, at some level, it's a mystery. I know there are things that I believe in, and clearly I think in very political terms, but and yet writing for me isn't about sharing politics. It's just that that's who I am, and so the writing becomes political. But that's not the purpose of it. Like the purpose of it is to do something with language that can't be done, or that hasn't been done before. Or I think that we are each so unique that we come from very specific places and from specific communities and specific situations, and therefore the confluence of all those things means that it is possible for each one of us to do something in writing that another person can't do. because we are wired linguistically in very different ways. And my job is to think about what I can do that you can't, and to give you that possibility. And that's just kind of fun. And therefore all kinds of other things infuse it. But at the end of the day, I think I am just playing with language. I'm telling you that there are different possibilities, and because I think that language is how we are, that language is how we think, language is how we feel. If I do my job well, it gives you access to a feeling that you didn't have before. It gives you access to another part of yourself. That's why you should do it well.
It's a great place to finish. Thank you very much, Kei Miller.